going to be starting in 1 minute. We'll be starting in 1 minute. I was muted. I'm having technical difficulties. Welcome to YNS Live here live on Fireside. This is your next stop live. If you guys are familiar with what I do here. I am a storytelling consultant. I also have a number of shows here on Fireside. Your Next Stop Live is one. And then I also have my series with the NFL, which is YNS Live with NFL Thread. We also have YNS Live with NFL Thread Pivot. You guys can catch one of our shows this, I think it's the 22nd, whether that's Wednesday or Thursday. I think it's Thursday. This week going into the holidays. I don't know if anyone else is a little cuckoo, but I'm definitely cuckoo. But we are we have Crystal Scott, who her and her husband were on together and probably over a month ago. And since then, Ian was drafted as a coach to Carolinas. I don't think they say drafted, but transferred as a coach to Carolina. So we're going to get the whole scoop on how they did that, because that is a really, really fun one. So whether you guys are here live on Fireside, hi Gina, James, Jessica, Valerie, and Trinity, or you're listening to the replay, or you're on LinkedIn. I don't actually think my LinkedIn is working, but if you're on YouTube Live or any of the other live, hello. So I'm excited to be here with you guys today. If you have caught any of the other series, I've been doing a 3-part series on storytelling. A lot of people don't realize I know I'm a podcast host, but I'm also a storytelling consultant, and I help people get their stories out there, thinking about the parts that of their story that are important, because a lot of people know how to kind of talk about themselves ish, but they don't know about the pieces that are actually really important, that their audience might be a little bit more connected to them if they talk about it. So stories connect us. That's what I love so much about what I do. I love hearing people's stories. So I'm going to give you guys, it's going to be a short show today. I'm just going to give you guys some tips to take away when you're thinking about it, especially if you are on the podcast circuit, if you are a small business, an entrepreneur, if you are even in the business world, you're an influencer, whatever you are, it's really important that you know how to tell your story to connect deeper with people. You don't know what's going to come about if you connect a little deeper with someone, if you're networking and you're trying to, get up the corporate ladder. If you're a podcast host or guest and you have a small business, or again, you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to get your product or your business out there, being able to share your story is more important than actually what you do as a business. I really, truly believe that, because when you share your story in a way that people are going to learn a little bit more about you and get a little bit more excited, it's important. So that is what I do. I love what I do, again, because I love hearing people's stories. So a couple different things to think about. If you are on the media circuit or you're on the podcast circuit, there's different increments. You might be on a media, like a little morning show. It's 15 minutes. You might be on a segment where you're only on for 10 minutes, or you're on a podcast for 30 minutes versus an hour. It's important to kind of figure out what parts of your story really stand out and make you unique. So if any of you guys know my story, part of who I am is that I am dyslexic, and that I played 2 sports in college. And that's what got me into college, is my athleticism. So me just telling you a little bit about that. If you know anything about dyslexia, you know that I failed so many times in my life. I don't care about failing. I don't even think about failing. I have no qualms about failing. I actually know when I'm doing something that's a little maybe out of my comfort zone, I'm probably going to fail, but I'm also probably going to learn something really amazing. Starting businesses, starting podcasts. I never even think twice about it. I don't care about rejection and all of that, because I had it so much as a kid growing up. If you know anything about playing sports, especially 2 sports in college, you know that I'm dedicated, I'm hardworking, I'm competitive. And those kind of things just give you a little window into who I am without me telling any more. You kind of get a little sense of who I am. If you know that I worked in New York City, I got a job even before I graduated because I knew that's where I want to be. Again, determined, someone that loves energy. You can feel that with me right now, but energy, being in it, like the city, just figuring it out myself. Those are all kind of things when you talk about your story. One thing that's important that people miss, and I've had so many guests on my podcast touch on, there's this. We don't need to talk about that, or we could talk about it later. But I feel a little energy rise, and I feel a little spark. And I know that that's something I have to talk about, because I know that's going to lead into a beautiful conversation So when you are sharing your story, even if you're practicing and doing it and you feel that you get more excited when you're talking about something, just like I'm doing right now when I talk about storytelling, you know that that's something that you should speak about. If it's something that you can talk about for hours, you know that's something that you need to add into your story. Now, not everyone knows how to get that into their story. Again, that is what I help and teach. And that's what I want to give you guys a little bit tips here so you can take away. So I'm going to give you like three things that are really important when you are starting to go on the circuits and share your story. Know the audience you're speaking to. Okay. That is so important. Say you're a small business. Say you're like a financial small business and you're going on a podcast about finance. You're going to lead with your finance part of your story. Now you're that small business and your finance, but you're going on a podcast that's about more about personal journals and connection and conversation. You're really not going to be talking about the finance part. You're going to be talking about why you love finance, what in your life got you in the spot where you are because of your backstory. So it could be something as simple as you were in middle school, you took a class and in math, and the teacher was just so dynamic and connected so much with you because the way they taught and the way you learned. You never really thought you were good at math until this one teacher came into your life and really taught you how to do it. Or it could be when you were a kid and you used to play Legos. You always were fascinated, not with the building of the Legos, but how many Legos were in a box. And you just always were fascinating with numbers and by a really early age because you found that. Or you were in high school and you were in math. You knew you loved math. You knew you were good at math, but you didn't know anything, where you could go. And there was a kid that really wasn't good in math, and they were your friend, or they, or weren't. Doesn't matter. But you were asked to help them, and you started helping them, and you fell in love with helping someone with their math. And that's how your business became evolved later in life when you never realized. Those little things are really important. So knowing your audience that you're talking to, if you're on the business podcast, you're going to lead a little bit more with the business because that's what the audience wants to hear. If you're on, but you still add your personal part. You still can talk about how you fell in love with the math, but it's going to be more heavy on the business, how you found the later half. If you're on a podcast that's more about personal journeys and conversations, it's going to be more about heavy on your beginning of your life versus the end of your life. And it's really important to know that. If you're on the media circuit, same. Who is your audience? If you have 15 minutes, how are you going to take that 15 minutes? And again, it can be just a snippet. I fell in love with math because I was helping this person that was really, really struggling. And that's where I learned. And that's where my company became what it became because I went to school for finance, but then this entrepreneur side of me. And there's little parts that you're just going to add in there and do that. But you're going to feel more connected. The audience is going to feel more connected because they hear your passion and they hear how excited you are about your story. If you guys have any questions, please feel free. The little react sign over here. You can ask over here. I'm happy to do that. I'm just checking if there's any questions here. Okay. So other thing is with that audience, right? You're going to think, okay, I have 15 minutes. I need to kind of figure out the parts of my story that are important, but it goes again with the audience and how to do it. So, and it's kind of seems like it's simple. It's not simple. It's not easy to do, but if you know who you're speaking to, you know what excites you in your story. So you know that that's going to connect when someone's talking about their story and they get excited. Think about when if you're on the podcast circuit, if you're in the media, or if you love listening to stories and someone's talking about their story and it's maybe a part that they're like a little, yeah. And I went to college. I played 2 sports. I studied communications. That was fun. I then went into New York to follow my dream to be in advertising. Then I met my husband. Then I started my podcast and raised 3 kids as I was creating this podcast. And I just love stories. I love talking, to people. And I realized from an early age, because of my dyslexia, because school was hard, that if I spoke to my teachers, they listened different. So I really honed in on my communication skills. Okay. Did you see what I did there in the beginning? And I know it's a little bit more dramatic, but I want you guys to get the sense. In the beginning, I was a little flat. It was a little bit about my story, but I was a little flat. But then when I started talking about that storytelling, you could feel my posture, perked up. I started really getting excited. So again, you're going to practice your story, whether you work with a consultant like myself, whether you're doing it, through the podcast circuit, whether you're doing it yourself and you're telling your story, whether you're talking to your husband, a friend, someone to practice on, because it is really important, which is so annoying, but practice is important because you want to be able to get as comfortable in those story realms. So just an example, what I do with my clients is I basically run a kind of a podcast with them. And we do it, sometimes it's once a week, twice a week. It depends how the person learns. But when I am listening to their story, I'll give them tips afterwards. Okay, I really want you to focus on this. I loved this part and I think it's important. I want you to kind of downplay that. It's cool, but it's really, you weren't excited about it and it kind of just, you got lost in your words there. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because it's about the practice part. And then we record it so then they can go practice back. Then the next time I'm like, okay, this is the audience you're going to be speaking to. Right. So then they're talking to that audience. Then we pick out the parts of their story that are important for that audience. Then the next time, then they practice that, they bring it in. Then we do that audience in different segments. So it's like, okay, you're on a 20-minute podcast. Let's get it out. You're on a 30 to 40-minute podcast. Let's get it out. You're on an hour to an hour and a half podcast. Let's get it out. Because the hard thing is to shorten and elongate. But again, when you're practicing so much and you know your story, it's going to be kind of like, okay, I got it. This is the audience I'm speaking to. This is my product. This is my brand. Because that's the other thing. If you have a brand, it's still the same thing. You're talking to an audience, and an audience, to get your brand out, you could be talking to it could be personal journal. It could be education. It could be fitness. It really depends on what it is, but whatever that audience is, that's what you have to lead with. So that is like your number one tip, is knowing that audience and knowing what you need to lead with. The number two tip is to really figure out the part that you get excited about. And that's just going to take practice. That's going to take practice about like, okay, I am excited about that. If you're kind of like, okay, there's so many things I'm excited about, think about the thing that you can talk about for hours. Okay, like days and hours. I'm excited about a lot of stuff. I'm an excitable person. I mean, there's no joke or question about that. I am an excitable person. So I have a lot, and that's what people will say. Like, how many passions do you have? I love people that know me. I love boxers. I love, dog rescue and all of that stuff. I can talk about that for a long time, but I can't talk about it for days and days and days. It makes me a little sad because I want to save every single animal. So that is a passion of mine, but I know my limits there. I could talk about education, what's wrong with education, especially for dyslexic people. I could talk about that for days. I get angry, really angry. And I know there's only some things that I can do to change that in the education world. So again, I know my limits on that, and it's not my path. I do help. I help, my own kid that's dyslexic. I help be the advocate for him. He's an advocate for himself. But so I can talk a lot about that. But I could literally talking about storytelling and people and how people connect and stories connect us. I could talk about that for days and days and days. And I don't think there's any limit on that. So knowing those things, what your limits are with your conversation, know how excited. And if you can talk about it a number of times, that's the other thing. So that's really like tip 3. Think about those things that excite you. Can you really talk about them time and time and time and time again? So if you're on the media circuit, the podcast circuit, if you're an author, whatever it is, if you start getting bored of your own story, the audience is getting bored of your own story. So you need to really hone in on the things that your goals are, your dreams are, and the things that excite you. Does anyone in the audience have any questions? I know I repeated myself a number of times, but I did that on purpose so it can kind of get in there, because I know a lot of times we don't, we listen, but we don't hear. It's the other thing I talk about, listening and hearing. If you're a podcast host, you need to really watch the cues of your guest, where they get excited. Those are the questions you want to ask. Don't have all your questions kind of outlined there and be like, oh, now I'm going to skip over that. And I'm going to, not go to that next question and go to this question because this is it. No, if someone's getting excited about something, talk about that, because that's going to be the conversation, is where it's going to be and where it leads you. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that again. And then I've been doing podcast tips on social media. If you guys want to go check me out on IG, it's I am Juliette Hahn. You can also go to my website, IamJulietteHahn.com. And little funny, the reason why I am Juliette Hahn is because there's a professor, I think she's at the Citadel, and her name is Juliette Hahn, and she's older than me. So she took all the stuff before I could ever do it. So again, tips here for you guys to keep and then really think about. You need to know who your audience is. You need to know who you are talking to. You also then need to figure out the parts of your story that you could talk about forever, right? And you need to practice those. So if you're on a podcast that's a 20-minute versus a 30-minute, that's a 40-minute, you know that those things that you're excited about, you're going to really lead with those and bring those to fruition. You're going to have like the beginning of the way you always talk about your podcast. You're going to do that for all of them. And then it's going to segue in. And of course, when you have a host, they're going to kind of segue too. But when you practice your story so much, you're going to know about those things. If you start getting bored of your own story, you need to change things up, whether it's practicing with someone else that's a professional that can help you a little bit, or it's really practicing with a family member. You need to do that because if you're bored with yourself, the audience is going to be bored. A couple tips that I've been giving. Again, if you guys have any questions, please, you can also email me at info@iamjuliethahn.com. Another thing, and I've given these tips out again on social media, couple different parts. If you have long hair and you're wearing, I don't have a microphone on here because I use this microphone obviously, but if you have one of these with a microphone, make sure your hair is not there scratching if you're a guest on a podcast, even if you're a host, or make sure it's not here rubbing on your sweater. It's the worst thing. It's so distracting when you are a host and your guest has that, or if you're a host and your feedback is coming back, your editor's not going to be happy with that. So that's one tip. The other thing is if you fidget, if you're going like this all the time, your audio is not going to be great and it's going to frustrate the listeners, and it's also going to frustrate your editor if you have one, or frustrate yourself. The other thing, so I guess this is my third tip, have something under the table. I use these little shells. I get them at the beach. They're like my favorite little pieces, and I literally just rub them. I just sit under the table and I rub them. That keeps me still, but also stimulates my brain. I am dyslexic. I am all over the place. But when I am doing my podcast and when I'm talking to people, I'm very focused because I know what I'm speaking about because I'm centered my brain. So that's a really important thing. It doesn't matter what kind of night's sleep I had, what kind of day I had. If I have these under the table, I'm pretty focused. The other thing is it's like a little clip. Sometimes I like just fiddle with that, but something that you can fidget with that's not loud. Don't be doing that stuff. Fourth, if you get dry mouth when you're nervous, especially, make sure you have something that you can take a sip of. But I did this one yesterday. So if I have a glass here, don't do that. Especially if you're a guest on a podcast, it's maddening. So I have like a pad of sticky notes here, or you can do a paper or a washcloth. You take a sip and then I put it down and you can't hear it. The guest will appreciate if you need to. And then, you can mute yourself as well so you don't, disturb. But when you have a dry mouth, you can hear it in the audio, especially if you're using a microphone, and it's not the best sound. Let's just be frank. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining Your Next Stop live here on Fireside. If you have any questions, or if you want me to go over anything again, how to tell your story in different increments, 15 minutes versus an hour, I'm going to go over it really quickly again. Know your audience. Know the things in your story that are excitable and that make you excited. So your audience is going to connect with you more. Stories connect us. It can be just a little thing. Just to give you an example, I had a guest on and she talked about pink peonies. But she just said, oh, there's this flower. I can talk about that in a second. But I could see that there was something there. So I asked about her. And this beautiful conversation came out of these pink peonies. And she was like, oh, I wouldn't even have thought of that. And I'm like, right. Because you didn't think it was an important part of the story. However, it was, because my podcast is personal journal stories. It's education. It's about passion. And I could feel the excitement and the connection. And I knew my audience was going to connect with her more. So those kind of things are really important, and not everyone does. For more tips about podcasting, please go follow I Am Juliette Hahn, really on any of the socials. I'm not great on TikTok, but I do try to put some stuff up. There's some shorts on YouTube. My live stuff goes out on YouTube as well, here live on Fireside. Catch any of my NFL stuff. It is here. This is where it lives, but it also goes out on Your Next Stop podcast. You can find all of that stuff also on my website, which is iamjuliethahn.com. You can find out how you can work with me. I help consult people, obviously, on storytelling, but I also do help when people have questions about podcasting. I've been doing this now since 2019, and this is something I love and I'm excited about, and I'm happy to share with others. So I will see you guys this week with Crystal Scott and Cynthia